I'm Frank Vaughn. It's August 9th, 2025, and I just wanted to let you guys know why I've been so quiet on Twitter and on YouTube. I've had an emergent situation, and I'm just going to play a short clip to show you the emergent situation. I've had a rainwater runoff problem, which has been ongoing for a while, with water going into my crawl space completely unbeknownst to me, because other than this drainage issue, I live in a fairly well-built home. So I've had to get back into the hand trenching business. This is actually pretty early on in the project. It's not quite done yet, but we managed to mitigate the heavy rain we had yesterday. So I apologize. It had to happen. See that nasty shovel blister? I am not in hand trenching shape, I can tell you that. I'm going to be finishing the job over the next couple days. But let's get into what you really want to hear about. Sometimes 2 days is an eternity in politics and geopolitical events. So I got to set some things straight. Some people think I have Trump derangement syndrome, and I'm not still rooting for the U.S. president to deliver on the promises that he made during the campaign. And over the last couple days, there has been some really green shoots of hope that the Trump foreign policy, in particular ending the war in Ukraine, might actually flower and take root. Meanwhile, this is what we're doing. Remember that this man, this is the victory party when he won the election. This man said we were in the middle of a whole series of national emergencies, not least of which was the threat of annexation for Donald Trump. Then, when he won, he proceeded to send Parliament home, and they've all been on vacation ever since he went on vacation. And then, in the midst of missing a very key trade deadline with the United States, Canada becoming isolated in the world, everybody else is racing to make deals with the American administration. The Europeans have done it. The Mexicans are catering to the Americans. Wait till you see what the United States is doing. I actually covered this before. We'll get into that next. Meanwhile, Canada is in the process of isolating itself most painfully vis-a-vis the United States. We have the most terrible leadership this country has ever had, and yes, I include the 10 years under Justin Trudeau. It got worse with Mark Carney, unbelievably. The headline is, Hemispheric Defense, Trump directs military for kinetic operations against foreign drug cartels. This is pretty important. I spoke about this months ago, that Trump signed an executive order in the opening days of his new administration, which highlighted, and in fact, actually, he redeployed resources, surveillance resources, to the Mexican border, targeting and finding where all the cartels are hiding out. And I said, military kinetic operations against the cartels with Mexican permission may be on the table in the near future. I actually thought it would happen quicker, but it appears to be happening now. Per the New York Times reporting, President Trump has issued a new directive authorizing the Department of Defense to conduct direct military operations against select Latin American drug cartels designated as foreign terrorist organizations. These designations are important to Canada. I'm not saying, nor am I predicting, U.S. bombs falling on Canada, but with the overwhelming evidence of cartels and triads overrunning Canada with the blessing, not the incompetence, with the blessing of our government, as has been demonstrated time after time, we should be taking note of this development, and we should have taken note of this development months ago when Trump came into office. This represents a major escalation in the administration's counter-cartel posture, moving beyond law enforcement and intelligence to support offensive kinetic missions, military operations. The Mexicans won't do a damn thing. There's been a lot of conversation and a lot of bilateral negotiation, as the Mexicans have been rewarded with a reprieve when it comes to Trump's tariffs, because they take the words that Trump says very seriously when he talks about drugs and human trafficking. He wants to fix those problems. Meanwhile, in Canada, even though we appoint a fentanyl czar and we've done all this virtue signaling, we had some helicopters flying around which have disappeared from the skies, have not taken seriously the fact that Canada is an international clearinghouse and a drug empire, a narco north. The very same cartels that are about to get bombed are the same that have been operating here in Canada. Meanwhile, our prime minister and our media continues down the path of isolation and offending the American administration while we're being left out to dry by the rest of the world to fight on alone. It's ridiculous. We are in such a bad spot. And I'm not one to take victory laps, but this is exactly what I called months ago that is now about to transpire. And it's one of the things about the Trump administration that I fully support. This idea that I've got Trump derangement syndrome when I'm simply calling for the very thing that he promised and praying that it gets delivered. Look, my job, there's enough people out there that will be homers. They'll cheer for Trump or they'll cheer for the Democrats, and it doesn't matter what they do. They will justify it and twist themselves into pretzels to make it work. My job is to, and this is how I see my role, is to demand what's promised, to hold people accountable. I don't care who they are. I could sit down in a room with the premier of China, the president of Russia, and Trump himself, and I would be sitting in a room with just three men. That would be my perception. I would have a conversation. I wouldn't be nervous. I wouldn't have sweaty palms. I wouldn't fall victim to the, oh my goodness, look at these famous people. I would actually be thinking about what can I substantively learn and do with my time. That's who I am. I don't have the need to chase celebrity. I don't care about fame. I don't care about fortune. I just care about what people say and holding them to it. This is a positive development, and I'll show you something else that's gone on in the last couple of days. More than $55 million worth of illegal cannabis seized in Haldimand County greenhouse. Say Ontario police, 16 people were arrested on July 16th for growing cannabis without authorization. Look at the scale of this setup. Now, whether or not you believe that cannabis should be legal or illegal, that's not the issue. We are talking about 107,000 plants, and we're talking about it being outside the reserve system. It's outside the government system. And who do you think these 16 people are? CBC's not telling us. 16 people charged. Global News, 55 million worth of cannabis seized. OPP say, scroll down. We don't get any names. I've checked every single media website. We don't get names. But you know who did give us names? A private Facebook page. They were able to produce the names. Facebook, which is sanctioned by our government and targeted through the Digital Tax Act. We have Trong Nam Nguyen, Trong Thoi Nguyen, Min Sun Hoang, Thi Sin Lu, Min Chao Nguyen, Thai Nguyet Bak, Thi Thoyan Nguye, Dung Levin, Thai Kang Trin, Hong Lam Nguyen, Chan San Lin, Thi Tin Chu Ti Tu Ku, Kelly Blair, Kelly Blair, Xingnang Yu, Hai Ning Zhu, Hai Yan Zhu. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to assume this is Triad. When I lived in Ontario, all the big drug busts had very similar names, and sometimes sprinkled with that one token person with a name like Kelly Blair to facilitate the transaction, probably acting as an interpreter, because these people are here as indentured serfs. They're victims in a way of the game itself, but the game is the Triads act in the open, and whether you think that cannabis should be legal or illegal doesn't matter. The proceeds of this find their way back into Triad bank accounts, and the money laundering that's forcing up your real estate prices and all the things that we've talked about probably find themselves mixed in with the fentanyl and the methamphetamine trade. And a lot of the profits, I'm assuming, go right back to China. We don't know because Canada doesn't investigate these things. We just allow them to transpire. At the highest level of our government, we've allowed Canada to become a narco state, and the vast majority of Canadians have no idea. They don't do the work. They don't do the research. They don't understand how bad it actually is. In spite of tripping over addicts everywhere you go, every single small city has got the same problem. Somehow Canadians can't see it. We're the most hypnotized people on earth. We talk about sovereignty. the vast majority of Canadians don't deserve their own country because we haven't been running things for decades like a country should be run. We've been selling ourselves out to everybody. But Canadian media, this is why they don't want to give you the names. You might put it together in your head. Back to the article that began this conversation. I think we should be paying attention. Now, on to the Trump-Putin-Alaska summit. Man, do I welcome this. This is positive development. And there's a number of reasons why. First off, Russian power. So it was noted in the comments section, some people really object to the idea that I would dare suggest that American power isn't ultimate in the world. When it comes to bombing third world countries and developing countries and Houthis, aircraft carriers work just fine. But when it comes to peer competitors, China and Russia, it's not so hunky-dory. Nuclear weapons keep the world in balance. Now, this article says, forget nukes. This is Russia's new deterrence weapon. Why Russia doesn't need to go nuclear to make its point, and how are the Oreshniks make that clear. Now, the Oreshniks are multi-impact hypersonic missiles, and they impact the ground with such kinetic force that they unleash devastation at a fraction of the cost of a nuclear weapon. Russia's been stockpiling these. They're not deploying them en masse in Ukraine as they could. They're stockpiling. And why are they stockpiling? Just in case they have to fight a kinetic war with someone else, a peer competitor like the United States. A negotiated settlement in Ukraine and an embracement of Russia would be beneficial to everybody. Why the Europeans are content to push away their best source of cheap energy is beyond me. They were more than happy for decades to be reliant on Russia for natural gas and other resources. I don't know why trade isn't being engaged. I don't know why this brinksmanship over an empire that is fading in its old context. So the Cold War context of NATO. It's a fading thing. Maybe it's because people at the highest levels of power in their 60s and 70s and 80s, for multiple different reasons, I'm simplifying the case, maybe they just can't think outside the box. Maybe they've just been doing things one way for so long that they just can't envision anything but their dominance or nuclear war. But the world has changed. It's multipolar. Peer competitors are a real thing, and American power is incapable of enforcing itself all over the planet. So we have to have respect among the nations again. And as I said in the last video, one of the greatest promises that came out of the Trump campaign was this concept of Fortress North America, where the empire is dialed down, where NATO is put in check, where the other nations are embraced, and we prosper, and we all get fantastically wealthy in the process. This is a very real thing that we can do. Canada, almost alone in the world, is failing to embrace this vision of what we could actually be, making things, producing things, trading with the world, being the best partner with the United States. It's literally the best thing we can do for our people. But nobody's telling you that story. Now, I find the location. RT says, and we have to go to the Russian media, Canada does not want you to have access to the other side of the coin. If you're going to watch Fox News, you should also watch CNN. If you're going to read CBC, you should also read the other side of the coin. We don't really have one in the world, but if you're going to learn about the world, you have to go to other state media. Read Al Jazeera. Read it all. That's how you get a well-rounded opinion. I highlighted, and it was actually bait, and there were people in the comments section that took the bait. A little while ago, I was using Al Jazeera, and I was using the Jerusalem, I think it's called the Jerusalem Times, and people criticized it both ways. You can't believe Al Jazeera. You can't believe the Jerusalem Times because everybody gets dialed into their section, and they don't peek over the wall. It's a walled garden. They don't peek over the wall. You got to get over that wall. Get up on the ladder and have a look at what everybody else is saying so that you can get an idea of what's actually going on. Anyway, Alaska showdown. Who really needs this summit more? From a stalled war to a broken oil embargo, the Kremlin's leverage has never looked stronger ahead of August summit. Very true. If the Americans decide to go down the road where they continue to sanction and they continue to try and enforce their empire in the traditional ways, it could force a break in geopolitics. You know, the BRICS nations are bigger than the G7 now. Canada's not even in the G7. I don't even know why we're still there. We're like the G9. The future of relations in the world and economics involves filling out for North America, involves filling in the gaps, the food gaps and the resource gaps in Asia. And if we push too hard, we will drive Russia and China and India and all these nations together. The United States will lose way more dominance than it has to. It will lose way more prestige and position. If there needs to be a new American century, it's going to be a century of divide and conquer. It's going to be a century of divide and conquer is not even the right term. It's a balance of power between nations. North America has all the cards, but it can't lay those cards down with force. It has to be done through diplomacy and economics now. It just has to be. It's the only way forward. At any rate, the Russians have tremendous clout. They have tremendous leverage. They're winning the war, whether people tell you they are or not. I can't believe the lies about that. Every single day, the Russians advance. It's meticulous, it's slow, it's designed to limit their casualties. In spite of what the Ukrainians are saying, they are losing the war. And every day it ticks on. This is why Zelensky, I don't have an article up, but Zelensky actually said it's time to end the war. Of course it's time to end the war. Because the territorial losses will just grow until Russia eventually, years from now, overtakes the entire country. They're collapsing. They don't have the manpower, and unless you want nuclear war, a negotiated settlement where Ukraine loses territory, cedes it to Russia, is the only course of action. And if you say it's wrong to hold that opinion, that Ukraine should lose its sovereign territory, you should really reflect and tell yourself the truth. In 2014, there was a government removed and another installed by coup. That government sought to ethnically and culturally cleanse the east of its country from those who looked east to Russia, not west to Europe. Those are the peoples that are being fought over right now. And unfortunately, in the millions have died over this dispute. It's got to stop. The West is demographically in a tailspin. We're not having enough babies. 1 in 10 Germans now, in spite of mass immigration of mostly male refugees and people from the Middle East, only 1 in 10 Germans are between the age of 15 and 24 right now. Do you have any idea what we're coming into? Every single life lost is a tragedy for Western civilization, bar none. Which is why, when I see or heard Trump wanting to maybe escalate the war and head down this tough path, when you want summits and you want a negotiated settlement or an imposed settlement. If Zelensky doesn't want to talk and Europe doesn't want to talk, the Americans have all the cards. They can impose a settlement, which is exactly what's going to happen. Worst case scenario, we get a stagnant conflict. Everything gets cemented in place and there's no official recognition. I don't think that's realistic for the Russian side because, again, if they keep the war going, they can just take it over. NATO troops engaging directly in Ukraine is not an option. It's global suicide. There comes a point where mutually assured destruction is the only thing left to a people. And from the Russian perspective, if we just pulled our heads out of our backsides long enough and thought about it, the Russian perspective is this is a war for survival. They're surrounded. You have to understand, their civilization legitimately feels threatened, and you have to nod to that. You have to recognize that. I've often alluded to Vietnam and how the Americans just didn't recognize that the Vietnamese were fighting for their independence. First, they fought off the French, and then they were fighting the Americans, and it didn't matter how much they were bombed and how many millions of them were killed. They kept fighting. And then when the Americans finally left with their tail between their legs, the Chinese came in and tried to dominate Vietnam. And what did the Vietnamese do? Did they lay down their arms? No. They fought the Chinese until they won their independence. If we had have just recognized what Vietnam was trying to do, things might have turned out different. There might have been a lot more people alive. We're in the same situation now when it comes to this subject. But on the flip side, there's a recognition. The Russians recognize that they might have a friend in the United States in the Trump administration. Somebody that understands the things that I'm talking about right now. The fact that they agree to send Putin to Alaska, former Russian territory, is very symbolic. The Russians have a lot of cards, but they're willing to play the game. They're willing to play the symbol game. They're willing to play the prestige game. I just want to say my hopes and my prayers are all in on the success of this summit. So to sum it all up, while Donald Trump and Putin and the rest of the world are moving on, Canada is stuck in a doom loop where we got a prime minister who wants you to know that gays are people too, or participate in the parade of faggotry. He had a picture taken with a guy in a dog mask as all these young men walking down the street dressed up as dogs. And I just think to myself, we are in some serious trouble. 51st state talk has been resurrected. Trump suggesting it, probably for the first time in the Carney era. I don't know if it's been done before, but suggesting and offering statehood. I have no idea why the Americans would want the entirety of this country, because we are so deranged. We're so deluded. We're intellectually destitute. We don't understand the opportunity that faces us for one of the most prosperous centuries in the history of the world if we just embrace our proximity to the United States. If we kicked out of office these people who have turned our cities into drug dens, this anti-family, anti-Christian, anti-faith, anti-sanity, propagandized, government control of everything in your life. Tim Houston banning people from fishing. He's a conservative premier, for Christ's sake. I don't understand why Trump would want the place. But I can tell you, we would be better off, 100% better off, if we had the Constitution and we were part of the United States. Point-by-point comparisons, as I've done before. This federation, this crappy constitutional monarchy, where this guy, Parliament's not in session, he's doing this stuff, the country's falling apart, we're in debt, we got rampant crime everywhere. These guys enable it. This is what we got. The people you elect, they're nowhere in sight. Governor General, King, it sucks. The system sucks. Your God-given rights have been taken from you, and the government says that rights descend from the government. Your human rights are bestowed upon you by the state in Canada, by the Federation, by these people, and they reserve the right to take them away whenever they want, and they do it all the time. We're in such big trouble, and we lack vision, and I couldn't give a damn if only 1 in 5 people see it. The fact of the matter is, and remains, even if I make videos critical of Donald Trump, if I make videos critical of the United States, we would be so much better off. And furthermore, when I do talk about the fact, Epstein, we need transparency. I do think there's a cover-up. I do think there's a cover-up because it damages certain American allies and it damages the intelligence community. There's no rational, conceivable way to believe that Jeffrey Epstein was not a central hub in global intelligence operations for Mossad and the CIA, and that, to me, is the single biggest reason, outside of perhaps the fake, fraudulent additions to the Epstein files, that implicate Donald Trump. I want transparency. I'm going to keep talking about it. But it doesn't mean that I think things would have been better off under Harris. God, no. The Trumpian chance is a great chance. And there's been some developments in the last couple of days that just give me a lot of hope, a lot of reasons to aspire and keep my eye on the ball. I'm Frank Vaughn. I'll see you in the next one.